Fine. Hopefully we have enough time to do this. I'm just going to ask for a volunteer to please pray for the beginning of this session, because I really need your
more, not only about your word, but we pray for the work that your servant Christian has put into this. Give him clarity and the opportunity to speak to us and have hearts that are able to understand and hear it. Thank you for this gathering, Lord. May you be glorified in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Brother. So tonight we're going to go straight into it. It's basically who wrote the Qumran scrolls. And somebody mentioned it a little bit yesterday. So basically the short answer is no one really knows. Some scholars believe it to be the Essenes. And here we just have, these are not the Essenes, it's just a picture. We have heard of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and even the Zealots in the Bible. But who are the Essenes? The Essenes were a sect of Second Temple Judaism from the 2nd century BC to the 1st century of the Common Era. Now, some scholars claim that the Essenes comes from the Zadokite priest. Now, Zadok, or Zadokite, so Zadok, or Zadok, I like that, is Hebrew for righteous. Okay? And Zadok was a priest in the time of King David, and you can find that in your Bibles in 2 Samuel 8:17. 2 Samuel 8:17. The word Essene comes from the Greek, which they say different. It's sonwine, and it means pious. Okay? Which is, in Hebrew, pious means Hasidim. Sometimes you'll hear that term, the Hasidim, or the pious ones. And so, we're going to go to the next slide. One theory claims that the Essene movement basically started early during the exile in Babylon. Many of the Jews in Babylon saw the exile like divine punishment from God. So to ensure that this would not happen again, a group got together, from First Baptist Church, they got together to ensure perfect observance of the law, or of the Torah. So after the exile, some in this group returned to Jerusalem, while others, they remained in Babylon. We know that. A lot of Jews remained in Babylon. And others, we were discussing this before class, just withdrew themselves from all that community. They didn't want to be a part of Jerusalem as the city of God. They didn't want to be in Babylon. So they set their eyes to the Qumran area by the Dead Sea. Now the Essenes are not mentioned in the Bible, but we do have historians, sources, outside of the Bible, who do mention the Essenes. And everybody, I think, has heard of the Jewish Josephus. In the next slide. And there you can read it for yourself. It says, "For there are 3 philosophical sects among the Jews, the followers of the first of which are the Pharisees, the second the Sadducees, and the third sect, which pretends to a severe discipline, are called Essenes." So even Josephus is saying that these guys are strict. Makes the Pharisees look like a bunch of wimps. Yeah, pretend. Okay, so that's Josephus. Everybody knows of the works of Josephus. If you're not familiar with him, he's got volumes and volumes of historian writings. He is Jewish. And then we have another historian, Philo. He is also a Jew. And he says there is a portion of those people called Essenes, because they are above all men devoted to the service of God, not sacrificing living animals, but studying rather to preserve their own minds in a state of holiness and purity. So he also mentions the Essenes. Then we have another historian. This is Pliny, called the Elder, and he is a Roman. He is not Jewish. And he mentions to the west of the Dead Sea. That was inserted, that was added in there so people can get an idea. The Essenes have put the necessary distance between themselves and the insalubrious shore, the Dead Sea. They are a people of unique, of its kind, and admirable beyond all others in the whole world, without women, and renouncing love entirely, without money, and having for company only palm trees. Okay. Now, they have found skeletal remains of women and children there. There is a debate that they didn't allow women there, and some say that it was just they were like trying to live like monks and celibacy, and then we find other writings that say there were women there, so it's a debatable issue. Now, not all the scholars agree that it was the Essenes. Professor Norman Gold claims that none of the scrolls or fragments recovered from the 11 caves we saw last night mentions the Essenes. I mean, the word is just not in there. Now, the relation of the Essenes to the Dead Sea Scrolls was apparently first suggested, if you remember last night, by a man named Eleazar Sukenik. He bought the scrolls, remember? So he's the one, by looking at these historians, he's the one that started, it must be the Essenes that lived at Qumran. So many scholars now avoid using the word Essenes in connection with the scrolls. So they'll just call them, the people of that community, whoever they were. Others say that some scrolls, or many scrolls, or even a majority of them, were brought into Qumran, like we said yesterday, from the outside. It could have been Jerusalem, it could have been from Egypt, it could have been from anywhere that they came and they just dropped all these scrolls there in the cave. Somebody really had
I was just, Essenes though did exist, is what.
Yes, the Essenes did exist,
But we don't know if they were.
but we do not know 100% if it was them. A lot of these scholars are just using, like what Pliny says, to the west of the Dead Sea, the Essenes. Maybe there was a sect there, but that proved that they were the ones that wrote the scrolls, or the community that actually lived there, or like we mentioned yesterday, that it was probably a Roman garrison there. Now we're going to go to the next slide. Now some scrolls were written in papyri, and here we have an illustration of the papyri process of making the scroll. You can see it right there on the screen, how it starts, how they're laying it, how they hammer it and smashing it. And then we're going to go to the next slide. And here we see, a more modern way of doing it. And there you have a sample of one. So this would be papyrus. And then we have, once the papyrus is made, then the writing process can begin, as you can see in the pictures. Here we have the ink. Remember yesterday that we showed a picture of that. So that's what it would look like when it was done. So it was a process to make. So we're going to go to the next. And another material used was parchment or vellum, or we call leather. Vellum is just the same thing as parchment in Latin. Now this process uses the skin of calves, sheep, or goats. Once the skin is removed, from with the hair and everything, then they're ready to use it. Now I work in a company called John Hart Design. We manufacture women's luggage and women's purses, and we use the hair of the calf and all that. So I get to see leather things, and I get to cut them, and it's very neat. It's a nice thing to witness. And so I can relate to some of this process. Now let's go to the next slide, please. Then the skin would be soaked in vegetable for better preservation. And then the leather hide would actually be stretched out and hang to dry. Once this process was accomplished, then they would actually cut the skin into the sections, however they wanted it to use for parchment. And we're going to go to the next slide. And the next step, obviously, would be to begin, the writing process. I had never seen this before, but that was amazing. A machine doing all the Hebrew writing. And the scrolls were, as Brother mentioned earlier, the scrolls were written in Paleo-Hebrew script, and then they were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and there was one in copper. And we're going to go to the next slide. Now the title here, it says books ranked by number of manuscripts. Now the scrolls were divided into different categories, biblical and non-biblical. So about 250 biblical documents were found, except, like I mentioned yesterday, for the book of Esther. Okay. Also Nehemiah wasn't found, it was discovered later on in about 2009 or 12, if I'm correct. And you can see and you can know your community by what they're reading, basically. So you can tell right off the top, they love the book of Psalms. They found 34 copies of the book of Psalms. The least copy was the book of Ezra and Chronicles. Now, there are reasons why the book of Esther was not found. They believe because Esther married a Persian king, a Gentile, and therefore they were not going to accept that in their canon. And this community, okay, and this community. And so that's one reason. And Nehemiah, because he helped a lot with the Persians. At least that was the theory until they actually found a fragment of the book of Nehemiah. And scroll down a little bit here, please. In 2012 then, a fragment of the book of Nehemiah was found. I couldn't find a picture of it. I wanted a picture of it. Couldn't get one. Nowhere to be found. Okay, so that's just a little bit of how the community viewed their canon. You know, each community makes their own canon. You know, the Catholic Church has their canon. We have our canon. You know, the Eastern Orthodoxers have their canon. So every community thinks different, and each community will say, this is how we believe our community will live by this canon. We love the book of Psalms. It brings us closer to God, so this will be our number one canon for us. Let's go to the next slide. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you see the one there, it says first, it would be first Qumran Isaiah. That's how they would call this. So of all 11 caves, cave 1, 4, and 11 are the most important ones. Remember yesterday, cave 1, that's where we found the complete Isaiah scroll. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, just the most important ones that scholars feel are the ones. So obviously this is the scroll of Isaiah. It is about 7.34 meters or 24 feet. It contains all the 66 chapters, and it is the most preserved. It was found wrapped in linen inside, remember we talked about in the pottery jars. It's dated to about 125 BC. Okay, so go to the next slide, please. And obviously we saw one of yesterday where Obama and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are looking at the replica. This is the replica. This is not the actual Isaiah scroll. They would not leave that there in the shrine of the book.
And a picture of it, isn't it?
Excuse me?
It's probably a photograph of it, isn't it?
Yes, that's what it is. It's just a replica. Yeah, they don't want to keep the actual ones there. You know, anybody can just go in and steal it. And let's go to the next slide. Now this one is called the Pesher, or the commentary. Pesher means commentary of Habakkuk, and you can see the writings. First Qumran, Pesher, Habakkuk. That's how they know what it is. So this is a relative complete scroll. It's about 5 feet, and this one was found in cave 1. So we have the Isaiah scroll and the Habakkuk scroll from cave 1. It interprets the first 2 chapters of the biblical book of the prophet Habakkuk, and is made up of 13 columns, which we were talking about, columns. They go by columns, and it was written in Hebrew. However, you who have heard of the tetragrammaton just means the 4 letters of God's name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. It's circled there, it's squared in yellow there. It's written in Paleo-Hebrew. We're going to get to that later, and even more tomorrow about the Paleo-Hebrew. Now, the scroll has been dated to about the second half of the 1st century BC, or even, BC. So the Romans are called in this text, they're called the Chaldeans or the Kittim. There's no historical persons mentioned in this Habakkuk Pesher, which would have been great because then we know who was the king or who was the guy in charge. There's individuals in this called the teacher of righteousness, the wicked priest, and the man of lies. Now, the teacher of righteousness, when they discovered this, just made the scholars like, whoa, is this Jesus that we're talking about? And that kind of brought in the idea that the Vatican had something to hide because they didn't want to publish anything like this, because the only teacher of righteousness we know is Jesus. So they kept this from being published for a while till they try to understand who is this teacher of righteousness that's being talked about. So I'm going to show you in the next slide just a section of it that says, "But the righteous shall live by his faith." We know that in our Bible. And he's giving us the interpretation. It says, "Interpreted, this concerns all those who observe the law in the house of Judah, whom God will deliver from the house of judgment because of their suffering and because of their faith in the teacher of righteousness." Okay? That kind of, makes some Christians like, who is this teacher of righteousness? We're talking years before Christ. Okay, so we're going to go into the next slide. And this one is called the War Scroll. It's first Qumran Milhama, which means war, okay, in Hebrew. This one was also found in Cave 1, and it's dated to the 1st century BC or early 1st century AD, okay, because the Qumran community, when Jesus was around, they were still around to about the year 7. So the Qumran community still was around. We're going to discuss about how some believe that John the Baptist may perhaps been an Essene or somebody from the Qumran community. Now, it is popularly known more with the title, the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. It is a war preceding the day of the Lord. That's basically what this is talking about. So the war lasts like 49 years. It's divided into 7 periods. And in the sabbatical year, there's a ceasefire, and this would occur when the angels of God would come down and join the sons of light to battle and defend against the sons of darkness. So it's very interesting read. I mean, I wish somebody make a movie about it. It'd be very interesting. So let's go to the next slide. And this is part of the scroll. And the dominion of the Kittim could be either the Babylonians or the Romans. Most scholars say it's the Romans because it was written around that time when the Romans were just coming in. Shall come to an end, so that the wickedness shall be laid low without any remnant, and there shall be no survivor of the sons of darkness. So let's go to the next slide. This is the community rule scroll, also found in Cave 1. Serek just means the community, and it means the rule, sorry. It had another name. The first time they discovered this one, they called it the Manual of Discipline, which we discussed yesterday, by Professor Miller Burroughs. And he called it the Manual of Discipline because it's all about disciplinary actions for the community. It is one of the oldest documents from the non-biblical scroll. It's dated to about 100 BC. 10 copies were found in Cave 4. The scroll mentions the community's way of life, basically. How they live, how they should dress, how they should act. Everything. So we have a section here from the community scroll. So shall altogether comprise a Yahad. Yahad is a community whose essence is truth, genuine intent, caring for one another after this fashion within the holy society, comrades in an eternal fellowship. Okay. So that was one of their beliefs. So we're going to go to the next slide, and this is from the Temple Scroll, and it's 11 Qumran 19. Cave 11, Qumran, and 19 because it was the 19th, if you want to say, object or item that they found in Cave 11. So they start numbering them. Like if we found this and it's 21, and that's 21, this is 22, 23. So the Temple Scroll is the longest of the Dead Sea Scroll. It measures over 25 feet. It's preserved almost in its entire length, and it is one of the most important to some scholars. It was excavated by the shepherds, the Bedouins. They found it in 1956. We kind of mentioned it yesterday. In the Old Testament, the Lord speaks to Moses, and Moses speaks to the people. But here in this scroll, the Lord speaks directly to the people, in the first person singular. Now the writing style tries to imitate the language, imitates the book of Deuteronomy. It's like if I'm going to make up my own scroll, I want it to sound very biblical. So what do? I use the language from a biblical scroll to make my scroll very authoritative. Okay? So more than half of the scroll, however, is devoted to the temple and the temple city, hence its name, the temple scroll. Okay? And here's a section of it. If a man informs against his people and delivers up his people to a foreign nation and does harm to his people, you shall hang him on a tree and he shall die. And if a man has committed crime punishable by death and has defected into the midst of the nations and has cursed his people and the children of Israel, you shall hang him also on the tree and he shall die. So a lot of scholars were assimilating this with Jesus being hanged on the tree. And notice how it says the children of Israel. Okay, so they're even using the name of Israel. They're not being mentioned as Essenes or the community of the Essenes. So before we get to the next one, just real quick, I have this one. It's from my son's bar mitzvah. I'm hoping it should have been earlier. And, now I need for you, Israel, to stand over there, just so they can get an idea. So you hold it from there. And I'll go slowly because. So this is a scroll. This is from Jerusalem. And it's pretty long. So I can probably go and keep going on. You're not going to see me anymore. But it's a pretty long scroll. Try to face it this way towards them. Actually, we'd be upside down in this case, but that's a lot of work to do by hand. If it was done by hand, I don't believe it's done by hand. It's probably done by a machine. But it's still a process to do. Which book is that? This is the whole Torah. The first 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And my son did have to read the 10 Commandments from here. We'll just put it down for now. And then I also had I wasn't sure I was going to bring that one. I had a little miniature one. I think this one's written in Aramaic.
That's like a pocket test.
Pocket. What brother you wanted Genesis with? Okay, let me look for the little
That was for
scroll.
the young people who can still see.
Exactly. So that's a pocket. So now we're going to continue with the copper scroll. And the copper scroll, 1 Qumran 15. Cave 3 was, this was found in Cave 3 in 1952. It contained fragments of Ezekiel, Psalms, Lamentations, and a commentary on the book of Isaiah. But the most unusual find, obviously, for them was this copper scroll, a long inscribed metal sheet, which may be, like we mentioned yesterday, a list of temple treasure hidden. It's dated to about 50 to 100 of the Common Era, after Christ. Now, Egypt was in fact the only known place where copper was used for writing. Okay, so go to the next slide and we'll see here how that was the only way they could open it, was to cut it. They were trying to think of a way not to damage it, but that was the only way. And the second picture on top, you see how they laid it down there after and it's eroded, that's why it's all green. Now the nice fine one, that would be a replica. It's not the actual copper scroll. They just did that so we can get a view of what it may have looked like. Once they decipher all the letters. And guess what?
So are the letters like depressed in the copper?
Yes,
Or is that so?
Yes.
That's how they get it. They just depress it because it's malleable.
Right. And from what I read, that's even harder to do, even more than on stone, to try to do it on copper. Go to the next slide, please, and we'll see some of the writing there. And there's, again, replica. It's not the actual one. Now we'll go to the next slide. And
We keep all of us paper diggers.
so that would be like a sheet of what it would look like if it was actually, done. and you can see how it erode. Okay, now we're going to go to the next slide. There was a Jewish scholar by the name of Solomon Schechter, and he found 2 copies of documents in a Jewish Geniza. Now, a Geniza like this one here, this is a synagogue, but inside they have a Geniza. A Geniza is a storage room where old discarded manuscripts were kept. Now, the Geniza was in this Ezra synagogue in Cairo, Egypt. And back then in 1896, that's where these scrolls were found. Now, go to the next slide. And here it says, Ben Ezra Synagogue, Supreme Council of Antiquities. Now that's very important. So go to the next slide. And here's Solomon, and with the tedious task of looking through old manuscripts. And it was in this Geniza that he found what's called the Zadokite fragment, which was dated to the medieval period. Okay? He found 2 copies. One he called copy A, which contained 16 columns, and copy B, which contained only 2 columns. Now he claims these 2 texts were copied around the 10th to the 12th century AD, after Christ. They were copied. So you're probably saying, what does this have to do with the Qumran scrolls? Well, these fragments were identical to the manuscripts found in Cave 4 at Qumran. So that means they made their way either from Egypt to Qumran or from Qumran to Egypt. Somebody took them, and that's where they were, in that synagogue. And Solomon discovered them. So we're going to see a piece of it, and it says, and I will drive you into exile beyond Damascus, says the Lord. He is called the God who commands armies. Now, it was originally called the Zadokite fragment, and then later got changed to the Damascus document by another scholar. They called it the CD. Okay, not the CDs that you play, but the CD. And the reason they chose the Damascus document was because Damascus was mentioned often. So scholars now are differing, like, what is the meaning of the Damascus? What do they mean by that? So some view it as a symbol or a symbolic place, of exile mentioned in the book of Amos 5:27. Others view it to be a code name for the Babylonians, or maybe even for the Romans. So we're going to go to the next slide, and this is paleography. As you can see, the square type, the Paleo-Hebrew type, and then we have the Dead Sea Scroll type. And Paleo comes from the Greek, which just basically means ancient writing. It is the study of handwriting. Now, scholars gather handwriting samples from papyri or pieces of pottery and coins and compare basically the writing styles. So some ancient documents were found. There were business documents, official decrees, often include the dates on some of these compositions. So by this method, the scholars note the changing style of writing and date basically the document. So when we discuss Paleo-Hebrew, if you can see it here, early 2000 BC. So they were using Paleo-Hebrew 2000 in BC. Now, if Moses, like I mentioned yesterday, or King David were around, they could not read Hebrew because it was different from Paleo-Hebrew, yet even more different from middle 1000 BC. So, as you see right there, it says late 400 BC. By that period, they were already in Persia. Okay, so the modern Hebrew that we know, or the Jews know today, didn't exist by the time of Moses and King David. So it's obvious that the only writing was Paleo-Hebrew. So that's one method of dating the manuscripts. Go to the next slide, and this is carbon 14. And as the Qumran scrolls were being discovered, scientists obviously developed a new way. I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls were being discovered, Israel was almost becoming a state, and carbon 14 was just being invented. So a lot of scholars did not want to use carbon dating 14 because they weren't sure if it's going to work, it's going to be exact to a time period. So it's a method of measuring the age of anything, plant, animal that had once been alive. So carbon-14 atoms are absorbed by plant life, animals, and we humans, we eat it and we absorb carbon-14. So when a living organism dies, it stops absorbing carbon-14 because it can no longer build bone tissue. So at this point, the carbon-14 atoms begin to convert to nitrogen-14. And nitrogen-14 is a stable atom. So by this method, scientists can determine how long the organism has ceased from absorbing carbon-14. Very confusing, very scientific. I wish scientists could explain to me, carbon-14 for dummies. But I have read about it, studied it. This is just a quick, view of it. The process is actually longer than what I'm showing here. So let's go to the next slide. And there you see, at death, 100% of carbon-14. Right here, then 5,730 years, 50%. So they're going by 5,730 years for anything that would have 50% of carbon-14 dating, and then they just keep adding twice that. So you notice it goes from 5,000, then you go to 11,000, from 11,000 you go to 17,000. So by the time it's at 17,000, you have less carbon-14. Okay. So that's another method. Brother, did you have a question? No. Okay.
There's still question about carbon-14
Yes,
dating.
still are.
It's not a pure.
It's not a precise, no.
And so,
Yeah, that's why a lot of scholars didn't want to use it.
In fact, they did a study where they had an egg,
Yeah, they did a study
and they got it, they said it was like 10,000.
Yes, and it wasn't.
At the
Yes.
grocery store last
Exactly.
week. So there are,
Yes, there are errors in that, just like there is in DNA too.
yeah, it's not
I
a
was gonna
perfect.
say, I wanted to meet the guy that's 18,000.
Yes.
okay.
So today, carbon-14 is now called accelerator mass spectrometry testing. The dating method is supposedly more precise. They use big, heavy machinery to get this precise dating. But we're not going to go into that because I would not be able to explain it to you anyway. But these are some methods that they're using now. Now let's go to preserving the scrolls. We mentioned yesterday, you can see the picture at the top. They're smoking. The other guy at the top, he's also smoking. They're damaging, you can tell how they're pointing to it. I mean, you got a scroll from the Bible, and you're smoking, and some were drinking coffee. They're damaging these things badly. So they were contaminated either through, the tobacco. They were contaminated even from other scrolls if they were one on top of the other. Just when you write something in pen and you put it on top of another paper, it penetrates, with the humidity. So some would use oils to soften up the leather because you think, well, if I soften up the leather and put oil, I'd be able to see the lines or the letters. So the scrolls were being exposed to all these sunlight, the tobacco, the air, tape. They were using Scotch tape on these things to put them together. I didn't know that. And they were using, I had read several agent cleanings, maybe Ajax or something. Anything. They were not experts in this. They were expert archaeologists, but they were not experts in scrolls. So go to the next slide. And here we see more pictures. And notice how we went from gentlemen, now we got ladies doing the work for the gentlemen, right ladies? Yeah. So they're the ones that have to come and clean up the guy's mess, like always, right? And you can see some here where I can't see some right there. They have put tape, and then they have to take off the tape. Notice that they're using gloves. The gentleman back there, he's not using any gloves. He's just touching it. We got oil on our skin, and we're just deteriorating faster and faster, even as they were going through them. Go to the next slide, please. And here we see more, how they're using those modern day machines and equipment. Notice they have the gloves, they're more careful, they're separating the pieces, they have the magnifying glass, they have the little tongs. You know, they don't want to touch them. They're trying to make up for all the errors that everybody else had made. And that is the Isaiah scroll. That's where it really belongs, you know. Now, some experts say that they should actually put the scrolls back in the caves, because we mentioned yesterday they're better preserved in the caves. What they're doing now is they're replicating, they're measuring the heat, the humidity in the caves, and they're trying to make something, some kind of room that will be similar to that to keep preserving the scrolls in that type of environment. Go to the next slide, please. And here we see another a scholar working through these. They're taping them up, putting them together. We mentioned yesterday that they would say, well, there's like 15,000 fragments, and then they say, well, there's 14,989 fragments. Why? Because, well, we find that this piece actually belongs to this one, so you cannot count it, like 15,000 anymore. It's actually 14,000 whatever number. So they had to go through a lot of that. I mean, it's like somebody getting a Bible and ripping up the book of Deuteronomy, and then they get another version of the Bible and they rip up Deuteronomy, and you're thinking you got two different texts, and it's actually the same text, but from different, books, or from different versions. But you're actually working on the same one. So let's go to the next slide. And here we have another scroll there, and they put that white paper over it. They have it under a special kind of glass, no light. Over there at work, when we store all the leather products and everything, there's no light because the leather changes quickly. Even in just fluorescent light, it changes. I can have an item and it'll change to a nice pinkish. Some are pinkish and some, maybe I'll talk to my boss if he let me bring a leather piece tomorrow. And so let's go to the next slide. I think what time is it? It's 7:07. Okay. Now we go to infrared lighting. Now the prefix infra basically comes from the Latin, which means below, or the term means below the red. So indicating its position in the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. So basically, its visible light has a range of wavelengths, okay, that are manifested in 7 colors of the rainbow. And red has the longest wavelength, and violet has the shortest. So infrared with wavelengths longer than the color red is visible to the human eye. We're going to go to the next slide, and there we have a sample of it. So this big one is the same one that's over there, but that's what it was originally. And then under infrared light, you can actually see see something. So sometimes they will run into situations like that, where, like, for example, here, I think it's here, you can almost tell there was a Hebrew letter there. Probably made a mistake, and they just erased it, however they erased it, and then they try to write over it. And they found a lot of that, and they find a lot of mistakes, or they'll write a number on top, some type of number, not number like the numbers we know, but their numbers, maybe indicating, don't forget this one, it has to be either finished or completed. It's very tedious. I've seen a video of it. It's just a lot of work. And you gotta love this. You gotta have a lot of patience to do this. Because of the Dead Sea Scroll, they developed this method. Before, they were using infrared lighting for other ideas, but never for documents this old. So let's go to the next slide. And here we can see how deteriorated some of, like that middle one there. To brush off all that old rock. This one you can't even really tell. It's probably all covered, and then they have to take off all the pieces. There's one that measures like 4 centimeters right there. And then you see the lady at the bottom end. She's piecing it all together. So it's very tedious task. And we should remember that many of the fragments were recovered by Bedouin shepherds. They were not professional archaeologists. The Bedouin shepherds rarely try to keep the fragments grouped together or separate them as they found them. I found these 4. I should write that I found it at this cave. They weren't doing that. They just knew that they have an object, you know, to me, I'm just gonna go sell it at the pawn shop and get some money off of it, and that's all I care about. So, they weren't taking notes on any of this. So, the reconstruction for this, as you can see, becomes even more difficult for the people working on it. So it's like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle, 1,000 pieces, and 800 of them are missing sometimes, or you have more than 800, and you don't really have the picture on the box to see what it looked like. So how are you going to be guided to group all this together? If we just take a Bible right now, obviously we wouldn't do this, but if you just start ripping it up into 1,000 pieces, and I tell you, okay, try to put it together, it's going to take a while. And it's in it's clear English, and we can see it and read it. I remember when one of the classes I had in archaeology, one of my professors, he basically gave us a paper. I was like the second one in the row, and he had some Hebrew writing, and he told the first gentleman, copy exactly how you see it. So the gentleman copies it, and before he got passed to me, he rips off the original. So I had to copy the gentleman in front of me. So then I copied it, and then I passed it on. By the time I got to the end, and we brought it back to the professor, it was different. I mean, it was totally different. Different. I mean, you had maybe an L that probably looked like a 7. I'm just using not Hebrew right now, but just like pretend a 7 or an L, or it could have been part of another letter. Or like when you do an M, and if you put an N next to it, people would kind of get them confused, or they'll put a W instead of an. Even the spacing was different. So once you space out a Hebrew word, it means totally different thing. So I thought that was very interesting, and I learned a lot from that. And then when he took it, not only did he take it, because he said, now we're going to have to try to solve it, he did this to it, he crushed it. And then he put it on the floor and he stepped. And then he made some holes in it, and then he opened it again, and he says, now try to figure it out. Because that's what they're going for. And it's not easy. It's a hard task, and we have to thank these people because they're trying to preserve it for maybe, 1,000 years more, if it's accomplishable. Go to the next slide, please. And
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Maybe it's not even known, but the people that are doing all this work, are they believers, Jewish or Christian, or are they just...
That's a very good question, brother. The first time that they were getting the archaeologists together, remember Father Roland DeVoe and all that, they did not want any Jewish hands on this. It was only going to be Christians working on it. And Israel, or the state of Israel at that time, and many scholars back then, they wanted them because it's theirs, it's Jewish, and they wanted them and they couldn't. They would not allow it. So there was more urgency, like we said yesterday, for them to publish it. Once they get published, then the Jews could actually look at them and see them. But yes, one of the scholars was not a believer, and so they needed that type of person who wasn't going to try to favor either Christianity or Judaism. So he went on later on to publish his own works about the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you look up anything on the internet of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll find hundreds of them. So eventually the errors of the past, are, like Brother says right now, they are being corrected in the present. And so I hope you enjoyed this. Now tomorrow's going to be, to me, I like tomorrow's class because now we're going to do the comparing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic text, which is known as the King James Bible, and the Septuagint, which is the Greek Bible of the Old Testament. And that'll be very interesting because now we're really going to see differences, and then that's why people ask, why is it different? This is why it's different. So I hope you can make it tomorrow again, and thank you for your patience. Does anybody have any questions?
About 10,000, but we're not there yet.
Okay, no questions. And I know it's a lot, we only have it's already actually time, so I'm sorry we had to go right through this. If you have any questions, just write my email and just write question. That way I know it's somebody from the class. Okay?